Stockholm, June 29, 1958. A cool northern breeze rolled across the Rosunda Stadium, carrying with it the nervous hum of 60,000 spectators. Flags rippled in gold and blue, brass bands filled the air with triumphal marches, and in one corner, a small pocket of Brazilian fans clutched their green and yellow banners like prayers. This was it, the final of the FIFA World Cup. On the field, Brazil stood in a line of yellow shirts and blue shorts, sunlight glinting off their faces. They were here to exorcise a national trauma, the ghost of 1950. The Maracanazo, that moment when Uruguay broke an entire country's heart. 8 years had passed, yet for every Brazilian child who kicked a ball, that scar remained. And now, their redemption rested partly on the shoulders of a boy. 17 years, old, quiet, almost shy, with eyes that seemed to carry both fear and faith. His name, Edson Arantes do Nascimento. To the world soon, he would be Pelé. As the Swedish anthem echoed through the stands, Pelé scanned the horizon, the endless sea of yellow and blue. He wasn't thinking of tactics or destiny. He was thinking of his father, Dondinho, listening on a radio thousands of miles away. The same father who once cried after the Maracanazo, and to whom Pelé had promised as a child, "Don't cry, Papa. One day, I'll win it for you." Moments later, the referee's whistle pierced the air. The ball rolled, and instantly Sweden attacked with the precision of a well-drilled machine. They moved with method, short passes, controlled rhythm, the classic European structure that had defined football for decades. Brazil, by contrast, seemed to sway and shimmer, a dance of instinct and improvisation. But before Brazil could settle, the nightmare returned. In the 4th minute, Nils Lidholm, Sweden's captain, took the ball. Near the box, slipped between defenders, and fired low past Gilmar. The net rippled. The stadium exploded, 1-0 to Sweden. For a brief moment, silence fell on the Brazilian bench. It felt cruelly familiar. The early blow, the doubt, the whisper that maybe Brazil was cursed to break its own heart. Reporters in the press box exchanged glances. One wrote, "They'll crumble again." But this team was different. Vicente Feola, Brazil's heavy-set manager, sat rigid in his chair, gripping his rolled-up notebook. He had been ridiculed for his selections. A 17-year-old boy, a right winger with crooked legs, a lineup filled with flair instead of discipline. Yet Feola believed he had discovered something deeper, a balance between joy and order, a system that allowed creativity to breathe within structure. His 4-2-4 formation was more than a tactic. It was a manifesto, and now it was time to prove it. At the 9th minute, Brazil's right side came alive. Garrincha, the man who dribbled as if gravity had given up on him, received the ball near the touchline. One feint, 2 defenders gone. He crossed low. Vava burst through the center. Goal. 1-1. The Brazilians erupted in joy. On the sidelines, Feola punched the air. Didi, the elegant playmaker, raised his arms and shouted, "Calma! Calm down!" reminding his teammates that beauty, too, required control. 8 minutes later, déjà vu. Garrincha again, tormenting the same defenders with that same impossible sway. Another cross. Another finish from Vava. 2-1. The rhythm had changed. Brazil were no longer just a football team. They were music. The Swedish crowd, polite at first, began to sense it. Something new, something beautiful, something unstoppable. Yet amid the celebration, one figure remained composed. Pelé stood near midfield, his face unreadable. He had touched the ball only a handful of times, each moment flashing with promise. There was a weight on him, the expectation of a nation, the judgment of the world. Reporters had called him a gamble, a child, a publicity stunt. But his teammates knew better. They had seen what he could do in training, the touch, the timing, the instinct beyond explanation. As the first half ended, Brazil led 2-1. Feola exhaled, but he also knew the job wasn't done. Sweden were organized, experienced, determined. They would come again. In the dressing room, the players sat quietly. Didi spoke softly. "We've waited 8 years for this. Play with your hearts, but play with your heads." Garrincha grinned, tapping his boots. Pele sat in silence, his eyes closed, replaying the touch of the ball in his mind. Then came the second half. The Swedes pushed forward, searching for an equalizer. Brazil absorbed, countered, flowed. And then, in the 55th minute, came the moment that would echo for eternity. A long ball floated into the box. Pele, back to goal, chested it down. In one motion, a movement that seemed to suspend time, he flicked it over the defender's head, turned, and volleyed into the corner. The stadium froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the roar came, a wave of disbelief, awe, and surrender. The boy had just created poetry out of chaos. Pele's teammates swarmed him, laughing, shouting, half in shock. He smiled only faintly, almost embarrassed by the enormity of it. For him, it was instinct, what his body knew before his mind could think. When the final whistle blew, Brazil had won 5-2. Pele added another goal, a late header that sealed the crown. But more than the scoreline, it was what the world had witnessed. Beauty and discipline, joy and precision, coexisting at last. As the players embraced, Pele collapsed into his teammates' arms, tears streaming down his face. He had done it. He had kept his promise. For Brazil, this was not just victory, it was liberation. The sorrow of 1950 was gone. The boy from Bauru had turned pain into art, and the world would never see football the same way again. And so began the age of Brazil, an empire of style, a dynasty of joy. Born from the flick of a teenager's foot beneath a Swedish sky. To understand how such a miracle could happen, how Pele, Didi, Garrincha, and a visionary coach reimagined what football could be, we must return to where it all started, a barefoot child chasing a ball made of rags, dreaming of a world beyond his small town. Long before Stockholm, before the golden shirts and the roaring crowds, there was Bauru, a small industrial town in the Brazilian state of São Paulo. Red dust filled the air, trains rattled by in the distance, and barefoot children chased makeshift balls through alleyways. Among them was a skinny boy with luminous eyes and endless energy. His name was Edson Arantes do Nascimento. He was named after Thomas Edison, a symbol of invention, though electricity hadn't yet reached every corner of Bauru. In his home, there was no luxury, only warmth and rhythm. His father, Dondinho, had been a footballer once, graceful and promising, until a knee injury ended his career. His mother, Celeste, worked as a cleaner and kept the family together with fierce dignity. Money was scarce. Sometimes the family couldn't afford a proper ball, so Pele and his friends tied old socks together, stuffed them with paper or rags, and kicked them through the dusty streets until nightfall. They called their team 7 de Setembro, named after Brazil's Independence Day. Pele often played barefoot, but his control even then was uncanny, a dance between chaos and precision. When his father listened to football matches on the radio, the boy would sit beside him, absorbing every word. Dondinho would explain how a forward should move, how timing mattered more than strength. And then came the moment that marked them both forever, July 16th, 1950, the Maracanazo. Brazil lost the World Cup final at home. 2 goals from Uruguay silenced the Maracana and an entire nation. Dondinho wept openly, his dream shattered through the static of a radio. Pele, only 9 years old, tried to comfort him. He made a promise, a child's promise, but one that would define his life. "Don't cry, Papa. I'll win it for you." That vow became his compass. By the time he was a teenager, Pele's talent had become impossible to ignore. He joined local teams, dazzling older opponents with his speed, balance, and intuition. But Brazil's football hierarchy was skeptical. Too small, too skinny, too young, they said. He was often benched, sometimes mocked. Yet every setback only sharpened him. When he was 15, a scout named Valdemar de Brito, a former national team player, visited Bauru to watch a local match. He saw Pelé glide past defenders as if he were dancing to music only he could hear. After the game, De Brito pulled the boy aside. "You'll be the best in the world," he said. "Come with me to Santos." Pelé's mother resisted. "He was too young to leave home," she said. But destiny, once set in motion, has its own gravity. With Dondinho's blessing, the boy boarded a bus to Santos, alone, carrying a small suitcase and a lifetime of dreams. At Santos FC, he met a new world. The club was already respected, known for its attacking flair, but it was Pelé who would make it immortal. His first training sessions astonished everyone. He was fearless, dribbling past senior players with audacity and grace. Within a year, at just 16, he made his professional debut. His first goal was a thing of instinct: chest, flick, volley, a preview of what the world would later witness in Sweden. By 1957, Pelé was the league's top scorer. Journalists began whispering that Brazil had found its new prodigy. The press dubbed him O Rei, the king, yet he was still a teenager, shy and humble, always deferring praise to teammates. But behind the rising star stood a nation at a crossroads. Brazil was transforming, industrializing, modernizing, trying to define its identity in the post-war world. Football was more than a sport, it was an expression of national pride, of artistry, of a belief that beauty could triumph over power. And Brazil needed that belief, because beneath the joy of samba and carnival lay the ache of 1950, a wound reopened every time the World Cup returned. The Brazilian Football Confederation knew that redemption had to come. But how? The European powers, Germany, Hungary, England, seemed too disciplined, too structured. Brazil's flair, while mesmerizing, had been their undoing. Enter Vicente Feola. Feola wasn't a revolutionary in appearance, heavyset, soft-spoken, methodical. But he had a vision: to merge Brazil's natural creativity with tactical discipline. He believed structure didn't have to strangle freedom, it could guide it. His system, the 4-2-4, balanced defense and attack with precision. 4 defenders, 2 deep midfielders, and 4 attackers unleashed with rhythmic harmony. To fill those roles, Feola needed not just skill, but chemistry. He sought players who could anticipate each other's movements like musicians in a jazz ensemble. He found his orchestrator in Didi, calm, elegant, a man whose passes bent space and time. On the right wing, he had Garrincha, mercurial, unpredictable, almost divine in his dribbling. And in the heart of the attack, a teenager who saw the field not as geometry, but poetry. Still, few believed Pelé would make the 1958 squad. In the final weeks before the tournament, he was injured. Some selectors wanted to leave him out. Even when he recovered, doubts persisted. How could a 17-year-old survive the pressure of a World Cup? But Feola saw something that numbers couldn't measure. He took the risk. Pelé boarded the plane to Sweden as the youngest player in the tournament. A quiet boy in a sea of veterans, carrying the expectations of 200 million dreams. As the plane lifted off, he looked out the window, watching Brazil disappear beneath the clouds. The land of his childhood, the dust, the laughter, the barefoot games, faded into memory. Ahead lay the unknown. He didn't know it yet, but history was waiting for him. When Brazil landed in Stockholm, journalists laughed. Too emotional, they said. Too untested. One European paper sneered, "They've brought a child to a man's tournament." But that child would soon rewrite everything they thought they knew about the game. And so began the rise, the road to glory, paved with struggle, doubt, and destiny. The Swedish summer of 1958 was mild and bright, a world away from the humid chaos of Rio. Brazil's players lived in a quiet training camp near Gothenburg, surrounded by forests and lakes. To the locals, they were a curiosity, men who played with smiles and rhythm, laughing during drills, juggling balls between sessions. Yet, beneath the joy, there was steel. The memory of 1950 still lingered. Every journalist, every coach, every fan who spoke to them whispered about Maracanazo. Even when the team laughed, The laughter carried a nervous edge. "This time," said Didi, "we play with our hearts, but not with tears." Vicente Feola's methods were precise. He had studied the failures of the past and decided Brazil needed discipline, mental, not just physical. He instituted a psychologist, João Carvalhais, to evaluate every player's temperament. It was revolutionary at the time and controversial. Carvalhais asked the players to complete written tests, psychological questionnaires meant to measure confidence, patience, and resilience. When he reviewed Pelé's results, he frowned. "He's too immature," the psychologist said. "Too young to handle pressure." Feola disagreed. "He's young," he replied, "but he has something no test can measure." Still, fate tested that faith early. In the group stage, Pelé was injured. He missed Brazil's first two matches, against Austria and England, watching. From the sidelines, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. The squad, even without him, impressed the world. Against Austria, they were brilliant. Garrincha mesmerizing defenders Didi, commanding midfield Vava and Mazzola striking with clinical precision. A 3-0 victory. Then came the match against England, a tactical chess game that ended 0-0 but introduced a new kind of balance in Brazil's play. For the first time, they had gone 2 matches without conceding a goal. The whispers began, "This Brazil is different." But after the second game, something deeper stirred. Pelé approached Feola and said, "Mister, I'm ready." The coach nodded but hesitated. The knockout rounds were near, and the risk of throwing in a half-fit teenager was enormous. Yet, when the time came, quarter-final against Wales, Feola made the call. Pelé would start. It was June 19th, 1958. The Welsh were organised and determined, led by Captain Dave Bowen and powered by the strength of John Charles, the Juventus star. They were no pushovers. Brazil, meanwhile, had to adapt. The pitch was heavy, the defence tight, and goals were scarce. For 65 minutes, nothing. 0-0. Brazil pressed, but Wales resisted. Didi tried from distance. Garrincha twisted through defenders, but the final pass failed. Then, in the 66th minute, Didi floated a pass into the box. Pelé controlled it on his chest, turned, and, with the calm of a veteran, slipped the ball between 2 defenders and past the goalkeeper. It was his first World Cup goal. For a second, even the Brazilian bench was frozen. Then they erupted, cheers, laughter, relief. Pelé ran to the corner flag, arms raised, his face a mix of disbelief and joy. In that instant, the world took notice. The newspapers wrote, "A star is born in Sweden." After the match, when asked about the goal, Pelé said softly, "It was God's gift." But he knew, and so did Brazil, that this was only the beginning. The semi-final loomed France, a powerhouse. They had just Fontaine, the tournament's top scorer, already with 9 goals. They were confident, physical, and ruthless on the counter-attack. Before the match, Feola gathered his players in a small room. "If we control the midfield," he said, "we control the game." Didi nodded. "Let them come," he murmured, "and then we'll dance." June 24th, 1958. Brazil versus France in Solna. The match began at a whirlwind pace. Just Fontaine's France attacked early, their quick passing slicing through the midfield. But within minutes, Brazil responded. Garrincha, unpredictable as ever, sprinted down the right wing, cut inside, and delivered a cross so sharp it seemed to hum in the air. Vava met it, 1-0. France equalized soon after through Fontaine, but the balance didn't last. Didi, elegant and composed, orchestrated everything, spreading the ball like a conductor leading an orchestra. At halftime, Brazil led 2-1. Then came the moment when the world met Pelé in full bloom. In the second half, he scored once, a rebound he pounced on before anyone else. Then twice, a curling finish beyond the goalkeeper. And then the third, a hat-trick born of instinct, balance, and the purest confidence. Each goal told a story, a boy growing into a king before the world's eyes. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read 5-2. Pelé had scored 3. France, stunned, could only applaud. Even Fontaine, who would go on to finish the tournament with 13 goals, a record that still stands, later said, "I saw the future of football that day." He was only 17. Back in Brazil, radios crackled with jubilation. Families gathered in living rooms, children danced in the streets, and old men wept. The trauma of 1950 seemed to fade a little more with every touch of that young prodigy's foot. In the locker room, Pelé sat quietly, a towel over his shoulders, almost dazed by what he'd done. Garrincha laughed and said, "You see, Menino? They said you were too young." Pelé smiled shyly. "Maybe they were right," he said, "but now they can't say it anymore." Fayola entered, his voice trembling. "Rest, boys," he said. "Tomorrow the world will talk about you. But remember, there is still one more match." The final awaited. Sweden, the host nation, had beaten West Germany to earn their place. They were tall, disciplined, and united. The crowd would be theirs. But Brazil had something else entirely. They had a dream finally within reach. They had redemption, artistry, rhythm, and a boy whose destiny was no longer a question. Pelé looked out from the bus window as they rode back to camp. The Swedish summer sun dipped low, glinting off the lakes. He thought of home, of his father, of that promise made so long ago beside a broken radio. He whispered to himself, "We're almost there, Papa." Next stop, Stockholm. The war for the crown of the world was about to begin. 29th, 1958. The Rosunda Stadium in Stockholm pulsed with anticipation. Yellow and blue flags waved in harmony and opposition. The hosts, Sweden, facing the radiant energy of Brazil. One team symbolized structure and experience, the other, rhythm and rebellion. The air trembled with the weight of what was coming. For Brazil, this wasn't just a football match. It was the exorcism of an old pain. For the Swedish fans, it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to witness their nation crowned world champions. For a 17-year-old named Pelé, it was the threshold between boyhood and immortality. Vicente Fayola stood on the sideline, arms crossed, his mind a storm of calculations. Brazil's 4-24 had worked beautifully so far, but Sweden's shape, fluid and experienced, was a different challenge. Their captain, Nils Lidholm, was elegant and intelligent, the heartbeat of the side. Up front, Hamrin and Simonsen could hurt anyone on the counter. In the tunnel, the players lined up. The Swedes, taller, broader, stoic. The Brazilians jittery but alive, their hearts thumping to an invisible rhythm. Garrincha juggled a ball between his feet, smiling, as if unaware that millions of eyes were upon him. Didi adjusted his armband, muttering a quiet prayer. Pelé stood still, looking straight ahead, his breath slow and measured. When the referee's whistle blew, the war began. And within 4 minutes, Brazil's dream threatened to crack. Lidholm, gliding through midfield like a general advancing his troops, exchanged a quick 1-2 with Simonsen, slipped between defenders and fired low past Gilmar. The stadium erupted. 1-0 to Sweden. The Swedish fans roared with delight, waving their flags, chanting victory songs. The echoes of Maracanazo haunted the Brazilians. The ghosts whispered again, "You will fall, just like before." But something in this team refused to yield to fear. Didi clapped his hands and shouted, "Vamos, calma! Let's go, stay calm." His voice cut through the chaos. The ball rolled back into play, and Brazil began to breathe again. Garrincha took charge. With that crooked stride and impossible balance, he picked up the ball on the right flank, faced 2 defenders, and toyed with them. One feint left, another right. Both were gone. He drilled a low cross into the box. Vava pounced, 1-1. The equalizer came like thunder after lightning. Garrincha's unpredictability had unstitched Sweden's order. Fayola didn't celebrate. He merely exhaled. But Garrincha wasn't finished. Minutes later, Another burst down the wing, another dance that left defenders dizzy, another cross, another Vava finish, 2-1. On the touchline, Fiola clenched his fists, the entire bench leaping into each other's arms. This was Brazil, attacking with audacity, scoring with rhythm, defending with courage. Still, Sweden refused to vanish. Lidholm rallied his men, urging calm. They pressed higher, forcing Jalma Santos and Nilton Santos to retreat deeper. Every minute became a test of nerve. Brazil, too, adapted. Didi slowed the tempo, dictating from deep, his passes long and languid, each one slicing through the lines with surgical precision. He was the conductor, and around him a symphony of movement unfolded. At halftime, the score remained 2-1. In the locker room, the mood was tense but controlled. Fiola wiped his forehead and spoke softly. "We've waited 8 years for this. Keep the ball, use your heads, they'll tire. Then we finish them." Pele sat quietly, nodding, his eyes unfocused. Not from fear, but from concentration. He had been close a few times, half chances that flickered and vanished. Something inside him said his moment was coming. When the teams returned to the field, the light had softened. Shadows stretched across the grass, and the stadium buzzed with nervous electricity. The Swedes came forward again, desperate for an equalizer. Brazil held firm, Bellini organizing, Zito breaking up play, Gilmar commanding his box with authority. And then, in the 55th minute, destiny arrived. The ball was lofted into the box. Pele, back to goal, cushioned it on his chest. A defender lunged. In a flash, Pele flicked the ball over him. A move so instinctive, so elegant, that time seemed to slow. As the ball dropped, he spun and volleyed it clean into the corner. Silence. For one surreal heartbeat, the world stopped. Then, the sound, an eruption of disbelief and wonder that rolled through the stands like a wave. Didi sprinted toward him, arms wide. The entire team followed, shouting, laughing, half in tears. Pele stood there, barely smiling, his face almost serene, as though the boy had just met the moment he was born for. Kolme Xi. Sweden fought back with courage, and Simonsen pulled one back to make it 4-2 after Mario Zagallo had extended Brazil's lead. But it didn't matter. The tide was unstoppable now. In the closing minutes, Pele rose above 2 defenders and nodded the ball softly over Kalle Svensson, the Swedish goalkeeper. The net rippled once more. 5-2. The boy had done it again. When the final whistle blew, Brazil collapsed onto the pitch in disbelief. Some players dropped to their knees, others embraced and wept. Fiola walked slowly onto the field, his face wet with tears. For a moment, even the Swedish fans applauded. They had not just witnessed defeat, they had witnessed beauty. Didi knelt and kissed the grass. Garrincha waved to the crowd, still grinning like a child. And Pele, overcome with emotion, buried his face into Gilmar's shoulder and cried uncontrollably. The weight of a nation had been lifted from his chest. Photographers swarmed, capturing the moment that would echo through the ages. A teenager in yellow, tears streaming. Down his face, embraced by teammates who suddenly seemed older, smaller, humbled by what they'd seen. This was not just a football match. It was revelation. The 4-2-4 system, Fiola's brave experiment, had conquered the world. It had fused discipline with improvisation, logic with art. From this day forward, Brazil would not only be champions, they would be the keepers of football's soul. The war was over, but something greater had begun. As night fell over Stockholm, the players celebrated quietly, almost reverently. Outside, Swedish fans lingered to shake their hands. Even in defeat, they knew they had been part of something eternal. For Brazil, it was redemption. For the world, it was a new way to dream. And for Pele, the boy who had promised his father that he would one day heal a nation, it was only the beginning. Next comes the moment that would seal his legend forever, the climax of destiny, where victory becomes myth. The roar of victory still echoed through Stockholm. But for Brazil, The sound carried something deeper, not triumph alone, but release. It was the sound of 8 years of sorrow dissolving into joy. As Pelé walked off the field, tears streamed freely down his cheeks. His body trembled, not from exhaustion, but disbelief. The boy who once tied socks into footballs had just conquered the world. Photographers captured him in Garrincha's arms, face buried, shoulders shaking. It was not a rehearsed image. It was pure, unfiltered humanity. Moments later, in the dressing room, silence fell. Players sat scattered around, some crying, some staring blankly at the floor. Fiola entered slowly, his suit drenched in sweat, his face glowing. "Meninos," he whispered. "Boys, you made history today." The captain, Bellini, lifted the Jules Rimet trophy high, and flashbulbs exploded. That single gesture, arms outstretched, trophy raised, became a ritual for generations to come. But for Pelé, the weight of the gold felt almost unreal. It wasn't just a cup. It was his father's tears, his mother's sacrifices, every barefoot match, every doubt, every bruise, every prayer. In that moment, he wasn't just representing Brazil, he was Brazil. Reporters from across the world crowded around him. A British journalist asked, "Pelé, how does it feel to win the World Cup at 17? He hesitated, searching for words, then said quietly, "It's something I can't explain. It's something only God could do." But the story of that final went beyond Pelé's brilliance. It was a masterclass in collective genius, a harmony that seemed almost supernatural. Garrincha, the wing magician, had carved open Sweden's defense again and again, his crooked legs weaving poetry where logic failed. Didi, calm as a sage, had controlled the game's rhythm with passes that felt preordained. Zagallo, selfless and tireless, had redefined what a winger could be. Tracking back, connecting lines, sacrificing flair for balance. Vava's goals had turned momentum when Brazil needed it most, and Fiola's 4-2-4 formation had shattered European convention, showing that freedom, when disciplined, could conquer structure. Together, they had invented something entirely new, the modern Brazilian way. The following morning, headlines told the world what had happened. The boy king of football. Brazil dances to glory. The beautiful game is born. In Rio de Janeiro, millions flooded the streets, waving flags, playing drums, weeping openly. It was said that even those who couldn't afford radios gathered outside bars, listening through open doors, passing the message like gospel. We won. We finally won. And far away, in the modest town of Bauru, an old man sat beside a wooden radio. Dondinho listened, motionless, to the broadcast that told him his son had done it, had fulfilled the promise he made as a boy. The old footballer's eyes filled with tears, and this time they were tears of pride. "Meu filho," he whispered, "you kept your word." The triumph of 1958 was more than sport. It was transformation. It was Brazil redefining itself, not through power or politics, but through beauty. The country that had been mocked as undisciplined had shown the world that creativity could be a form of intelligence, that joy could be a kind of strength. For Pelé, the world changed overnight. Before Sweden, he was a prodigy. After it, he was a phenomenon. Newspapers hailed him as a once-in-a-century talent. European clubs offered riches beyond imagination, but Santos refused to sell. The Brazilian government declared Pelé a national treasure, legally barring his transfer abroad. He was now more than a player. He was an emblem, a living embodiment of hope. Still, behind the fame, there remained the same quiet boy who prayed before matches and thanked his father after goals. Reporters who met him in those first days of fame were struck not by arrogance, but gentleness. He smiled easily, spoke humbly, and often changed the subject to teammates. In the following weeks, as the team returned home, the journey itself became legend. At every stop, from Paris to Dakar, from Recife to Rio, crowds swarmed the airports chanting "Brasil, Pelé, Campeão!" Fireworks exploded, bands played samba through the night, When the plane finally touched down in Rio, thousands surrounded the runway. The players emerged from the aircraft like heroes from myth, sun-touched, exhausted but radiant. Pelé stepped out last, the Jules Rimet trophy held delicately in his hands, the crowd roaring his name. He turned to Didi and said softly, "Do you think they'll remember this?" Didi smiled. "For as long as there's football, Menino. For as long as there's Brazil." That evening, from the balcony of the National Palace, the team presented the trophy to President Juscelino Kubitschek. The air was thick with song and tears. The president looked at Pelé and said, "You have given our people faith again." Pelé simply nodded. He didn't need to speak. His football had already said everything. Yet amid the celebration, one quiet truth lingered. The boy's journey had only just begun. The crown he now wore was heavy, not of gold, but of expectation. The world would look to him, measure him, challenge him, worship him. But on that warm Brazilian night in 1958, he was just a son who had kept his promise. Pelé returned home to Bauru soon after, stepping off a bus as crowds chanted his name. He hugged his parents, overwhelmed. Dondinho looked into his son's eyes and said, "You see, Edson, the world knows your name now, but to me, you'll always be the boy with the ball of rags." Pelé smiled and whispered, "Then that's who I'll stay." The world had crowned him, but he remained grounded, humble, faithful, focused. And that, perhaps, was the true miracle of Sweden. The match was over, the trophy won, but something eternal had begun. Brazil had discovered not only a champion, but a spirit. And that spirit would soon echo across generations, across continents, and across time. The echoes of Stockholm lingered long after the final whistle. Brazil had not just won a World Cup, they had rewritten the story of football. The yellow shirts, once symbols of heartbreak, were now emblems of joy, the color of rebirth. For the rest of the world, 1958 became a dividing line, before Brazil and after Brazil. Before, football was about structure, physicality, and discipline. After, it was about rhythm, artistry, and imagination. The sport had been an industry. Brazil turned it into art. The images spread like wildfire across continents. Garrincha's impossible dribbles, Didi's majestic stride, Vava's power, and the boy Pelé weeping into his teammate's shoulder. That photograph, raw, trembling, divine, would come to define the emotion of victory itself. Everywhere the game was played, children tried to recreate that goal. The chest, the flick, the volley. Under the blazing sun, in muddy alleys, on beaches and gravel, Pelé had made the extraordinary look human. He had made the impossible feel reachable. In Brazil, a nation rediscovered itself. The newspapers spoke of a spiritual victory. The country, just 8 years removed from its most painful sporting tragedy, now stood as the capital of world football. The trophy arrived in Rio and was paraded through the streets in a golden carriage followed by millions. The streets pulsed with drums and laughter. The nation's wounds had finally healed. Yet, the meaning of that triumph reached beyond the pitch. Brazil in 1958 was a country on the rise, modernizing, industrializing, searching for an identity that matched its dreams. The victory in Sweden became part of that new self-image, confident, creative, unashamedly unique. For the Brazilian people, Pelé wasn't merely a footballer. He was proof that greatness could be born in poverty, that genius could spring from the humblest places. And he wasn't done. In the years that followed, the legend expanded. Pelé returned to Santos FC, leading them to domestic and international glory. He would go on to win 2 more World Cups, 1962 in Chile and 1970. In Mexico, each in its own way confirming what 1958 had revealed. But Sweden remained special. It was where the world first saw the miracle. The Brazilian 4-2-4 formation became the blueprint for attacking football for a generation. Coaches studied it, adapted it, and feared it. The fusion of Didi's orchestration, Garrincha's improvisation, and Pelé's finishing became the DNA of modern play. Even European giants began to chase that elusive balance, the equilibrium. between freedom and order that Fayola had dared to imagine. Tactically, emotionally, spiritually, football had changed. But perhaps the most enduring transformation was human. Pelé became the first truly global athlete, a name known in every language, a face recognized on every continent. In an age before social media, before live broadcasts could span oceans, his fame crossed them anyway. He became an ambassador, not only of sport, but of possibility. When Nelson Mandela met him decades later, he said, "To watch Pelé play was to watch the joy of a nation." And yet, for all the reverence, Pelé never forgot the small boy from Bauru. He spoke often of those early days, the barefoot games, the promise to his father. "If I hadn't lived that life," he said once, "I wouldn't have known what the dream was worth." For Garrincha, Didi, Vava, and Fayola, the 1958 victory was also life-defining. Garrincha's legend would grow, the man with crooked legs who brought beauty to imperfection. Didi would be hailed as one of the greatest midfielders of his time, a pioneer of elegance and control. Fayola's tactical innovation became a cornerstone in coaching philosophy worldwide. Each man carried a piece of that triumph into eternity. But the crown always rested on Pelé's head, the teenager who turned sorrow into joy and joy into history. Decades later, when people spoke of football's purest moments, of artistry that transcended competition, they returned to Stockholm, to that flick and volley. It wasn't just a goal, it was the birth of the beautiful game. In 1958, Brazil taught the world that football could be poetry, that winning didn't have to mean crushing the opponent, it could mean elevating the soul. And that idea, born in the Scandinavian summer, would ripple through every generation that followed. It would live in the flair of Zico, the genius of Ronaldinho, the precision of Ronaldo, and the grace of Neymar. Each of them, in some way, tracing their lineage back to that boy under the Swedish sun. Years later, when Pelé reflected on that tournament, he said, "I didn't realize what had happened until I came home. In Sweden, I was just playing the game I loved. But when I saw what it meant to Brazil, I understood. It wasn't about me. It was about us." And perhaps that's why the moment endures. Because it wasn't only the story of a prodigy, or even of a nation redeemed. It was the story of how sport, at its most beautiful, can heal. The Maracanazo had broken Brazil's heart. The victory in Stockholm mended it forever. As the curtain falls on that summer of 1958, one image remains, a 17-year-old boy, tears glistening under the northern light, embraced by his teammates as a world bows in awe. He wasn't supposed to be ready. He wasn't supposed to lead. And yet, he did. That day, under the Swedish sky, a boy became a king, and football became eternal. This was not just the dawn of Brazil's dynasty. It was the birth of a legend.